The cold March morning clung to the Appalachian Mountains like a reluctant guest. Frost painted delicate patterns across the cabin windows, and the wind whispered secrets through the ancient pines. On the crest of a hill overlooking a modest cabin, a solitary figure stood against the pale sky. Ezra Sullivan's weathered hands gripped a small shovel, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air as he dug into the half-frozen ground. The hole wasn't deep, just enough to hold the wooden box clutched in his other hand. 38 years of life had etched lines around his eyes, yet it was the 4 years since Eliza's death that had truly aged him. He knelt beside the shallow pit, his movements deliberate as he placed the wooden box inside. With calloused fingers, he opened the lid one final time, revealing its precious contents. A blue ribbon that had once held Eliza's golden hair, a faded letter in her elegant handwriting, and a small coil of blonde hair preserved like treasure. Ezra reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a revolver, its metal cold against his palm. He stared at it for a long moment, then raised it slowly, pointing it toward his temple. His hand trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper. "Not yet, Ezra," a familiar voice seemed to whisper on the wind. "Someone will need you." His hand fell to his side, the gun heavy with accusation. 4 years and he still couldn't follow through. 4 years of waking alone, of silence stretching through empty rooms, of revenge plotted but never executed. Ezra returned the gun to his pocket and covered the box with earth, patting it down with the flat of his hand. Standing, he looked out across the valley to the small town of Oak Ridge, visible in the distance, its church steeple piercing the morning mist. He hadn't been welcome there since the rumors started after Eliza's death. 4 years is long enough to grieve, he murmured, though there was no one to hear but the pines and the wind. But not long enough to forget. The cabin greeted him with familiar emptiness when he returned, its sturdy logs holding back the wilderness but not the solitude. Ezra hung his coat by the door, noticing an envelope that hadn't been there earlier. Someone must have delivered it while he was on the hill. The return address read St. Louis Matrimonial Agency, the black ink stark against the cream paper. Ezra frowned, turning the envelope in his hands before breaking the seal. As his eyes scanned the page, confusion gave way to disbelief, then anger. "Pleased to inform you that we have found a suitable match for your request. Miss Clara Wilson, age 24, of good health and moral standing, will arrive at the Oak Ridge station on March 30th with her 2 dependents." "Request?" Ezra muttered, his voice rough from disuse. "I made no request." Memory flashed like lightning, Pastor Thornton's earnest face across the general store counter 3 months ago. "It's been 4 years, Ezra," the pastor had said, arranging cans of beans into a neat row. "A man shouldn't live in solitude for so long. It's not natural." "I swore to Eliza," Ezra had replied stiffly. "That's not what she would have wanted for you." Now, staring at the letter, understanding dawned. Pastor Thornton had taken matters into his own hands, playing matchmaker without permission. The presumption of it burned in Ezra's chest. 2 dependents? He read again, confusion mingling with his anger. Servants, perhaps, or elderly relatives. Certainly not. Children, Eliza's voice seemed to say, though he knew it was only in his mind. Her voice had become his conscience, his companion in isolation. "She's bringing children, Ezra." He crumpled the letter in his fist, intending to throw it into the fire, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of Eliza's voice, or perhaps just the realization that it was too late. This Clara Wilson was already on her way, would arrive in mere days. Ezra smoothed the paper against his thigh and read it once more, resignation settling heavy on his shoulders. In his workshop behind the cabin, Ezra lost himself in the familiar rhythm of woodwinding. His hands shaped a rocking chair that no one had commissioned, joining pieces with the precision that had once earned him respect in the valley. The repetitive motions kept his mind from dwelling too long on the letter, on the unwelcome guests soon to arrive. "I always knew you'd need someone, Ezra," Eliza's voice whispered in his thoughts. "I always knew." He set down his tools, closing his eyes against the sudden wave of memory. 4 years earlier, in their bedroom, Eliza had lain pale against the sheets, blood seeping through the bandages. The smell of smoke still clung to everything, their clothes, their hair, The very walls of the temporary shelter where they'd taken her after pulling her from the burning cabin. "They found us, Ezra," she had whispered, her breath rattling in her scorched lungs. "You have to go. You have to live." "I can't without you," he had pleaded, holding her cold hand between his own. "You must," she insisted. "Promise me you won't let this hatred consume you. Promise me you'll live." He had nodded, tears falling onto their joined hands. "I swear." But in the years since, he'd kept only half that promise. He had lived, yes, but it was a hollow existence fueled by thoughts of vengeance against Clay Harmon, the wealthy landowner who had wanted their property for timber harvesting, who had threatened them, and who had ultimately escaped justice for the fire that took Eliza. Ezra rolled up his right sleeve, revealing the extensive scarring that covered his arm, a permanent reminder of his desperate attempt to save Eliza from the flames. The physical pain had long since faded, but the memory remained fresh as an open wound. 3 days later, the sound of wagon wheels on the narrow mountain path drew Ezra from his work. He stepped onto the porch, wiping sawdust from his hands, and watched as an old wagon struggled up the final stretch toward his cabin. The driver, a grizzled old man Ezra recognized from town, flicked the reins half-heartedly. The horses, nearly as old as their master, plodded forward with weary determination. Behind the driver sat three figures huddled together against the spring chill. As the wagon reached the clearing before his cabin, Ezra straightened his shirt and brushed back his unruly dark hair. He hadn't prepared for visitors, hadn't wanted them, but his mother had raised him with manners he couldn't entirely forget. The wagon creaked to a halt, and the driver nodded once in Ezra's direction. "Delivery for Sullivan," he announced, then turned to his passengers. "This is as far as I go, miss." The largest of the three figures rose first, a young woman with auburn hair partially hidden beneath a worn bonnet. Her blue dress, though clean, showed signs of long travel and frequent mending. One shoe, Ezra noticed, was worn through at the toe. She stepped down from the wagon with practiced grace, then turned to help the smaller figures. Two girls, one about 10 years old with the same auburn hair, the other perhaps 7 with paler blonde locks. The older girl surveyed the cabin and surroundings with sharp, assessing eyes. The younger clutched a tattered cloth doll to her chest. Ezra removed his hat, unsure what to say. These weren't servants or elderly relatives. They were children, girls who looked at him with a wariness that spoke of hard lessons learned young. The young woman approached, her spine straight despite obvious exhaustion. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Clara Wilson." Her voice carried a soft Kentucky lilt. "These are my sisters, Eleanor and Lily." Ezra nodded stiffly. "Miss Wilson." An awkward silence stretched between them until the young girl, Eleanor, stepped forward. "She's not lying. Uncle Edward will kill us if he catches us." Clara shot her sister a warning glance, but the damage was done. Ezra's eyes narrowed, moving between the three of them. "Uncle Edward?" he questioned. Clara sighed, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "It's a long story, Mr. Sullivan, one I'd rather not tell standing in the cold." The wagon driver cleared his throat. "I'll be heading back now," he announced, already turning his horses. "Wait," Clara called, but the man merely tipped his hat and continued down the path, leaving the three women alone with Ezra. Ezra looked at their single trunk, at the tired faces of the girls, at Clara's determined expression. This wasn't what he had agreed to. He hadn't agreed to anything at all, but he couldn't turn them away. Not with night approaching, not with nowhere else for them to go. "Come inside," he said finally, picking up their trunk. "It isn't much, but it's warm." The cabin's main room seemed to shrink with 4 people inside it. What had felt spacious for a solitary man now felt cramped. Ezra moved with careful precision, keeping distance between himself and his unexpected guests. The girls stayed close to Clara, watching Ezra's every movement. He set about making a simple meal: dried venison, bread baked days earlier, and water heated on the iron stove. "You can sleep there," he said, gesturing to the bearskin rug near the hearth. "I'll bring blankets." Clara nodded, helping the girls remove their worn coats. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. We won't be a burden for long." Ezra wanted to ask what that meant, where they planned to go, but something in her guarded expression stopped him. Instead, he set out the food and retreated to give them space. As they ate in awkward silence, Clara finally spoke. "Our parents died in a fire," she said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Our farm in Kentucky Uncle Edward, my father's brother, was named our guardian. He wanted our land. Eleanor added, her voice surprisingly adult for a child so young. We heard him say he'd permanently handle us after sending us to the orphanage, but he meant to kill us. Ezra's hand tightened around his cup. And you came here because... We ran, Clara said simply. I saw your advertisement in the newspaper. It seemed far enough away. Lily, who had been silent until now, looked up from her doll. Are you going to send us back? The question hung in the air, laden with fear. Ezra looked at the child's wide eyes, then at Clara's tense posture, ready to grab her sisters and run if necessary. No, he said finally. You can stay the night. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Relief washed over Clara's face, though she tried to hide it. As the girls prepared for sleep by the hearth, Ezra heard Clara whisper to Eleanor, just one night. Tomorrow we'll find a way to Oregon. Ezra settled into his wooden chair by the door, rifle within reach. He wouldn't sleep much tonight, not with strangers in his home, not with the questions their presence raised, but something about their fear resonated with him. He knew what it was to run, to hide, to live, looking over your shoulder. As the girls drifted to sleep, Ezra watched Clara gently tuck the blankets around her sisters. Her movements were those of a mother, not a sister, practiced, protective. She caught him watching and held his gaze for a moment before looking away. In that brief connection, Ezra saw something familiar. The same determined resilience he had seen in Eliza's eyes when they first built this cabin, when they had claimed their own piece of the mountain against all odds. Just one night, he told himself, echoing Clara's whispered promise. But somehow, looking at the three sleeping figures bathed in the hearth's glow, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Morning brought a tentative routine. Clara woke first, moving quietly to rekindle the fire. Ezra, who had dozed in his chair, watched through half-closed eyes as she navigated his kitchen with careful movements, finding the coffee and pot without disturbing him. When she stepped outside to draw water from the well, Ezra rose and followed at a distance. The morning air was sharp with lingering winter, the ground still hard beneath their feet. You don't trust me in your home alone, Clara observed, not turning to look at him as she worked the pump. I don't know you, Ezra replied simply. She nodded, accepting this truth. My sisters and I will leave after breakfast. We've imposed enough. Where will you go? Clara's shoulders tensed slightly. West, Oregon maybe, somewhere he won't find us. With what money? The bucket overflowed, water spilling onto Clara's already worn shoes. She didn't seem to notice. We'll manage. Ezra studied her profile, the stubborn set of her jaw, the shadows beneath her eyes. Your sisters are too young for such a journey. We have no choice, Clara replied, finally turning to face him. Unless you know of a safe place nearby where three women can live unquestioned. The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Ezra looked toward the hills, where morning mist still clung to the trees. His cabin sat isolated for a reason, because he had wanted distance from a town that whispered about him, that had failed to bring his wife's killer to justice. You can stay, he heard himself say, the words surprising them both, until you find something better. Clara's eyes narrowed. Why would you offer that? Ezra had no ready answer that didn't expose too much of himself. The girls need rest, he said finally, and I could use help around the place. It wasn't entirely a lie. The cabin had suffered from his neglect, and spring brought work that was easier with more hands. But the truth was something he wasn't ready to articulate, that their presence had stirred something in him, some echo of the life he had once planned with Eliza. Clara studied him for a long moment, weighing his offer against unknown alternatives. 1 week, she decided. We'll stay 1 week while I look for work in town. Ezra nodded, knowing the town would offer no work to a young woman with 2 children and no history. But he kept that knowledge to himself, allowing her the dignity of her plan. As they returned to the cabin, Eleanor was already awake, watching them through the window with those 2 observant eyes. The child missed nothing, Ezra realized, and wondered what other secrets she held behind that vigilant gaze. A week stretched into 2. Clara established herself as a capable housekeeper, cleaning corners of the cabin that Ezra had long ignored. She cooked simple but satisfying meals from their limited supplies, darned clothing, and kept the hearth burning with an efficiency born of long practice. The girls adjusted more slowly. Eleanor remained watchful, always positioning herself between Ezra and her younger sister. Lily was quieter, often playing with her doll in corners of the cabin, singing softly to herself. Ezra maintained his distance, working in his shop most days, hunting when meat ran low. He observed their routines without commenting, noted how Clara always tasted food before giving it to her sisters, how she slept between them and the door. Every morning, Clara walked to the edge of the property, looking toward town, as though measuring the distance to safety. Every evening, she returned without mentioning leaving again. On the 10th night, Ezra woke to soft singing. He rose from his bed in the small room off the main cabin, moving silently toward the sound. In the main room, lit only by dying embers, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, singing to her doll. The melody froze Ezra in place, a gentle lullaby that Eliza had often sung, an old folk tune about dreams and safe harbors. His breath caught, memories overwhelming him. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. Lily looked up, unafraid in the dim light. "The golden-haired lady taught me. She said it's a song for good dreams." Before Ezra could question her further, Clara appeared from the shadows, her posture defensive. "Lily, it's late. You should be sleeping." "That song," Ezra persisted. "Where did you hear it?" Clara tensed. "Our mother used to sing it to us." "No," Lily corrected innocently. "The golden-haired lady who stands by Mr. Sullivan at night. She taught me yesterday." The air in the cabin seemed to still. Clara looked at Ezra with new wariness, while he stared at Lily with shocked disbelief. "Lily has an active imagination," Clara said quickly. "She—" "Golden hair?" Ezra interrupted. "Did this lady have a small scar just here?" He touched his own chin, indicating the spot where Eliza had borne a thin white line from a childhood accident. Lily nodded solemnly. "Right there. She said it's from when she fell from an apple tree when she was little." Clara's face paled. Ezra felt as though the floor had shifted beneath his feet. There was no way Lily could know about Eliza's scar, no way she could know that story. "Go back to sleep, both of you," he managed finally. "It's late." Clara guided Lily back to their makeshift bed, but her eyes remained on Ezra, filled with questions he had no answers for. He retreated to his room, but sleep eluded him for the remainder of the night. "I need to go to town," Ezra announced the next morning. "We're low on supplies." Clara looked up from the bread she was kneading, flour dusting her forearms. "Will you be back by nightfall?" The question revealed, more than she perhaps intended, her continued fear, her uncertainty in his absence. "I'll return before dark," he assured her. "Lock the door while I'm gone." He saddled his horse, aware of Clara watching from the porch. Before he could mount, she approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Will you return?" she asked directly, her voice low enough that the girls inside couldn't hear. The question startled him. "This is my home." "I just mean—" She hesitated. "We can be gone when you return, if that's what you want." Ezra studied her face, noting the resignation in her eyes. She was accustomed to being unwanted, he realized. "I'll be back," he said firmly. "Lock the door." Clara nodded, the ghost of relief crossing her features. "We'll be here." The ride to Oak Ridge took nearly 2 hours, the trail winding down through pine forests and across a shallow creek. The town itself was modest, a main street lined with essential businesses, a church with a steeple that could be seen for miles, and scattered homes radiating outward. Ezra tied his horse outside the general store, steeling himself for the inevitable stares and whispers. 4 years of isolation hadn't erased the town's memory or curiosity. Inside, Pastor Thornton was arranging a display of canned goods. He looked up as Ezra entered, surprise and something like satisfaction crossing his weathered face. "Ezra Sullivan," he greeted. "It's been months." Ezra nodded curtly. "Pastor, did your guest arrive safely?" The older man's eyes twinkled with poorly concealed interest. "You had no right," Ezra said quietly, keeping his anger in check. "No right to arrange that without my consent." Pastor Thornton's smile faltered slightly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Ezra. Sometimes we need a nudge in the right direction." 3 people showed up at my door," Ezra countered. "A woman and 2 children. That's more than a nudge." "Children?" The pastor's surprise seemed genuine. "The agency mentioned dependents, but I assumed—" Her sisters, Ezra clarified. Girls who need stability, not an unwilling host. Pastor Thornton considered this, stroking his gray beard. Perhaps it's divine intervention then. Those children need a home. And I need coffee, flour, and sugar, Ezra interrupted, unwilling to hear the pastor's assessment of his needs. And information. Have there been strangers in town asking about 3 women traveling alone? The pastor's expression shifted to concern. As a matter of fact, yes, a well-dressed man and his associate were asking at the hotel yesterday. Said they were looking for his nieces who had run away from home. Ezra's hand tightened on the counter edge. What did he look like? Tall gentleman, expensive clothes, had an air of authority about him. The man with him looked more rough, carried a gun, scar down the side of his face. Said they were from Kentucky. Ice formed in Ezra's veins at the description of the second man, a scar down the face, like Clay Harmon, but it couldn't be. The coincidence would be too great. Did they give names? Pastor Thornton frowned, trying to recall. Wilson was the gentleman's name, Edward Wilson. The other man, I don't believe he was introduced. Ezra gathered his supplies with renewed urgency, paying quickly and moving toward the door. Ezra, Pastor Thornton called. I told them I hadn't seen any women fitting that description, but they're staying at the hotel, planning to search the outlying areas. Ezra nodded his thanks and stepped into the street, his mind racing. Clara's uncle was already here, already searching, and if his companion was who Ezra feared. At the mercantile next door, he overheard 2 men talking on the porch. Wilson's offering $50 to anyone who finds them, one was saying. Says they stole family heirlooms before running. Mighty generous reward, the other replied, though that fellow with him gives me the chills. Cold eyes. Heard him talking with Simmons at the saloon last night, the first continued. Something about expanding timber operations from Kentucky to Virginia. Said they'd handled resistant landowners before. Ezra froze, his back to the speakers. Timber operations. Resistant landowners. Virginia. Fire's a quick solution, the man quoted, chuckling. That's what he told Simmons. Worked in Virginia, would work here too. The world narrowed to a pinpoint of rage. Ezra forced himself to breathe, to continue walking as though he hadn't heard. But his mind was a storm of connections and realizations. Clay Harmon was here, the man who had threatened them, who had likely set the fire that killed Eliza. And he was working with Edward Wilson, the man hunting Clara and her sisters. Ezra mounted his horse with mechanical movements, his body functioning separately from his turbulent thoughts. He urged the animal into a trot, then a gallop once they reached the forest trail, racing against the fading daylight in his own rising fear. The coincidence was too great to be chance. Either Clara and her sisters had brought danger directly to his door, or some greater design was at work, bringing together separate threads of tragedy into one possible moment of justice. As he rode, Ezra checked his revolver, ensuring it was loaded. If Edward Wilson and Clay Harmon came to his cabin, they wouldn't find helpless women. They would find a man who had waited 4 years for vengeance. The sunset painted the mountains blood red by the time Ezra reached the clearing. Clara stood on the porch, rifle in hand, watching his approach with visible relief. I was beginning to worry, she admitted as he dismounted. Ezra secured his horse, then turned to her with grim determination. Pack your things. You and your sisters need to leave tonight. Clara's face drained of color. They're here, aren't they? Uncle Edward found us. He's in town, Ezra confirmed, with a man I believe is named Clay Harmon. Clay Harmon, Clara repeated, recognition flickering in her eyes. Yes, that's Uncle Edward's business partner. How did you... No time for explanations, Ezra cut her off, ushering her inside. Gather only what you need. I'll take you to the North Ridge. There's an abandoned hunter's cabin. You'll be safe there until I can arrange something more permanent. Eleanor had already begun packing their meager belongings, her sharp ears having caught the conversation from inside. Lily looked confused, clutching her doll tightly. Why do we have to leave the nice cabin? She asked Clara. Because bad men are coming, Eleanor answered before Clara could, her young voice hard with knowledge beyond her years. Ezra moved efficiently around the cabin, gathering food, blankets, and ammunition. His mind worked through options, contingencies, escape routes. Clara touched his arm, stopping his frantic preparations. Mr. Sullivan, Ezra, why are you helping us? You could turn us in, claim the reward they're offering. Ezra met her gaze, seeing the confusion there, the distrust born of hard experience. Clay Harmon killed my wife, he said simply. 4 years ago in Virginia. He burned our cabin with her inside. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, horror dawning in her eyes. Oh God, she whispered. The fire that killed our parents. Uncle Edward wasn't home that night. He was with Clay Harmon, his business partner. The final piece clicked into place. Not coincidence, but connection. Clay Harmon and Edward Wilson had worked together before, had used fire to eliminate obstacles to their timber ambitions in Virginia. They had killed Eliza and likely Clara's parents in Kentucky. We need to leave, Ezra said, his voice rough with emotion. Now, before they decide to search here. As they loaded the wagon Ezra kept for hauling timber, Lily suddenly stopped, looking back at the cabin with a strange expression. The golden-haired lady says we shouldn't go, she announced. She says we should stay and fight. Clara shot Ezra an apologetic look. Lily, please, we don't have time for... She says there's a hidden room behind the bookshelf, Lily continued, pointing toward the cabin, and a gun under the floorboards beneath the blue rug. Ezra and Clara stared at the child, then at each other. There was indeed a hidden room, a space Ezra had built to store valuables, accessed through a concealed door in the bookshelf. And he had hidden a revolver beneath the floorboards years ago, a backup he'd nearly forgotten. How could she know that? Clara whispered, her earlier skepticism giving way to unease. Ezra had no rational explanation. Either the child was unnaturally observant, or the impossible was occurring. Eliza's spirit was somehow communicating with her. We don't have time to question it now, he said finally, but perhaps your sister is right. Perhaps we should stand and fight. Clara looked torn, glancing between her sisters and Ezra. These men are killers, she reminded him. They've already taken so much from both of us. Which is why they need to be stopped, Ezra replied, a new resolve hardening within him. Not just for vengeance, but to protect others. To protect your sisters. Eleanor stepped forward, her young face set with determination. I want to stay and fight, she declared. I remember everything they said that night. Everything they did. I can tell the sheriff. Clara knelt before her sister, brushing hair from her face with gentle fingers. Eleanor, your memories won't matter if we're dead. They will if we win, the child countered with simple logic. Ezra watched this exchange with growing admiration for both sisters. Eleanor's courage, Clara's protective instinct. These were not helpless victims, but survivors with steel in their spines. If we run, they'll keep hunting us, he said quietly. If we stay, we have shelter, supplies, and the advantage of familiar ground. Clara stood, her decision visible in the straightening of her shoulders. Then we stay. But my sister's safety comes first. If things go badly, we run. Agreed? Ezra nodded. Agreed. Now let's prepare. As they re-entered the cabin to plan their defense, Ezra felt Eliza's presence more strongly than he had in years. Not just in memory or imagination, but as a tangible force guiding them toward confrontation and perhaps justice. For the first time since losing her, he allowed himself to consider a future beyond vengeance. A future where healing might be possible, where his cabin might again know the sound of laughter and the warmth of family. But first, they had to survive the coming storm. The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Ezra moved with renewed purpose, transforming his isolated cabin into a defensible fortress. He checked and reinforced shutters, created hidden caches of supplies, and instructed Clara on escape routes should they need to flee quickly. The root cellar connects to a tunnel, he explained, showing her the narrow passage behind shelves of preserved vegetables. My father dug it during the war. It leads to a cave about half a mile east. If things go wrong, take your sisters and go. Clara nodded, committing the route to memory. The past days had revealed a different side to Ezra Sullivan. Not just the grieving widower, but a man of intelligence and foresight. A man who had spent 4 years planning vengeance with meticulous care. You've been waiting for this, she observed as they inspected the cabin's defenses. Ezra paused, his hand stilling on the rifle he'd been cleaning. Not this exactly, he admitted, but something like it. a chance to face Clay Harmon. And now my uncle is involved too. Clara's voice carried equal measures of fear and resolve. I'm sorry for bringing this to your door. Don't apologize, Ezra said firmly. Perhaps it was meant to happen this way. Clara wasn't sure she believed in such providence, but she couldn't deny the strange connections between their separate tragedies. And she couldn't explain Lily's knowledge of things she couldn't possibly know. The hidden room, the concealed weapon, the songs Eliza had sung. Outside, Eleanor was helping Lily gather kindling, their small figures darting between the trees at the edge of the clearing. Despite the danger, the girls seemed to have found a sense of peace at the cabin that had eluded them since their parents' death. Eleanor's vigilance had softened slightly, and Lily laughed more freely. They like it here, Clara said softly. I haven't seen Eleanor so calm in months. Ezra followed her gaze, something softening in his own expression. Children are resilient, he observed, more so than adults sometimes. Clara thought of all they had endured, the loss of their parents, the betrayal by their uncle, the long journey to this remote cabin. They shouldn't have to be. Ezra had no answer for that. He returned to his task, methodical in his movements, but his eyes drifted occasionally to the girls. Clara recognized the look, the same one she had seen in her father's eyes when he watched them play, a mixture of protectiveness and wonder. That evening, Clara discovered the small room hidden behind the bookshelf. Just as Lily had described, the door was concealed by a section of shelving that swung outward when a certain book was pulled. Inside was a space barely large enough for a small desk and chair, its walls lined with more books and papers. Curiosity overcame her hesitation, and Clara stepped inside. This had been Eliza's space, her sanctuary. The desk held an open journal, a pen still resting in the inkwell as though its owner had just stepped away momentarily. Dust had settled on everything, undisturbed for 4 years. Clara gently touched the journal, not reading but noting the elegant handwriting that filled its pages. Beside it lay newspaper clippings about timber rights, land ownership, and a series of suspicious fires across Virginia. Eliza had been investigating, Clara realized. She had been gathering evidence against Clay Harmon. A wooden frame caught her attention, the only personal item among the documents. It held a portrait of a young woman with golden hair and a gentle smile, a small scar visible on her chin. Next to her stood a younger Ezra, his face unlined by grief, his eyes bright with happiness. That was our wedding day, Ezra's voice came from the doorway, making Clara start. I'm sorry, she apologized, stepping back from the desk. I shouldn't have intruded. Ezra entered the small space, his shoulders nearly touching the walls on either side. Lily told you it was here, he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. She knows things she shouldn't be able to know. Ezra picked up the portrait, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. Eliza was a teacher before we married, he said quietly. Then she became interested in writing. She was working on a book about life in the mountains when he trailed off, unable to finish. She was also gathering information about Clay Harmon, Clara observed, gesturing to the newspaper clippings. Ezra nodded, replacing the portrait carefully. She discovered he'd been buying timber rights across 3 counties, sometimes through less than legal means. When owners wouldn't sell, accidents happened. Fires, mostly. Like the one that killed her, Clara said softly. And your parents. Ezra's eyes met hers, an understanding passing between them that went beyond words. They were bound by parallel griefs, by a common enemy. Clara thought of Eleanor's sharp memory, of the conversations her sister had overheard between Edward and Clay. Eleanor remembers everything, she said. Every word they spoke that night. She could testify. If we can get to the authorities, Ezra replied, the unspoken challenge hanging between them. They would have to survive the coming confrontation first. As they left the hidden room, Clara paused. Your wife, she began hesitantly. Do you think she's still here? That she's speaking to Lily somehow? Ezra was silent for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. I don't know, he admitted finally. I've felt her presence since she died, heard her voice in my mind. I thought it was grief or guilt, but what Lily knows. He shook his head. I can't explain it. Lily has always been sensitive, Clara offered. Even as a baby, she seemed to sense things before they happened. Mother called it a gift. Whatever it is, Ezra said, I'm grateful for it. Without Lily's knowledge, we wouldn't be as prepared. They rejoined the girls in the main room where Eleanor was teaching Lily to play checkers with a set Ezra had carved years earlier. The domestic scene struck Clara with unexpected force. How quickly they had adapted to this place. How naturally they had begun to function as something resembling a family. Later, after the girls were asleep, Clara found Ezra on the porch, staring into the darkness. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the night chill and joined him. Do you think they'll come soon? She asked. Ezra didn't look at her, his eyes scanning the tree line as though expecting shadows to materialize at any moment. Yes, he said simply. They've had time to search the easier locations. We're next. Clara nodded, accepting this assessment. Lily said something strange today. She said the golden-haired lady, Eliza, told her that the bad men would come when the moon is high. Now Ezra turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Tomorrow night is the full moon. They stood in silence, side by side, the implications settling between them. One more day of preparation, one more day of relative peace. Then whatever was meant to happen would unfold. We should try to sleep, Clara said eventually. We'll need our strength. Ezra nodded but made no move to return inside. After a moment, Clara understood. He was standing guard, as he had every night since they had decided to stay and fight. I can take a shift, she offered. You need rest too. I'm used to little sleep, he replied, but the weariness in his voice betrayed him. Clara touched his arm lightly, feeling the tension in his muscles. A few hours, she insisted. I'll wake you at midnight. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Trust, perhaps, or mutual recognition of the strength in the other. Ezra finally nodded, surrendering to her logic. Wake me if anything seems wrong, he instructed. Anything at all. Clara took his place in the rocking chair, rifle across her lap as he had shown her. She wasn't confident in her shooting ability, but she understood the basics. Aim, breathe, squeeze the trigger. If it came to it, she would defend her sisters with whatever means necessary. The night wrapped around the cabin like a cloak, the silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of wind through pine needles. Clara found the solitude strangely peaceful. After months of constant fear, of looking over her shoulder, there was odd comfort in knowing the confrontation was coming. Soon, one way or another, it would be over. Her thoughts drifted to Ezra, to the grief he had carried alone for 4 years. She understood that burden, had felt its weight since her parents' deaths. But she'd had her sisters, had been forced to set aside her own sorrow to tend to theirs. Ezra had faced his loss in isolation, with only vengeance to sustain him. Yet despite that, or perhaps because of it, he had opened his home to them, had chosen to stand with them rather than deliver them to their enemies. The man who had first greeted them with reluctance now slept inside, trusted guardian to her sisters. Clara wasn't naive. She knew their alliance was born of necessity, of shared enemies rather than genuine connection. But in these tense days of preparation, she had glimpsed the man Ezra had been before tragedy reshaped him. Intelligent, capable, even kind in his gruff way. The thought brought unexpected warmth to her cheeks, and she turned her attention back to the darkened forest. Such reflections were dangerous. If they survived the coming confrontation, she and her sisters would still need to move on, to build their own life elsewhere. Becoming attached to Ezra Sullivan, to his cabin, to the tentative peace they had found here, would only make the inevitable departure more painful. At midnight, Clara reluctantly went to wake him as promised. She found him sleeping fitfully, his brow furrowed even in rest. For a moment she hesitated, loath to disturb what little peace he had found. I'm awake, he said, eyes opening suddenly. Is something wrong? No, Clara assured him. It's midnight. My watch is over. Ezra sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. In the dim light from the banked fire, he looked younger, the hard lines of his face softened by shadows. Anything unusual? He asked, reaching for his boots. All quiet, Clara reported, though I saw a fox near the chicken coop. A ghost of a smile touched Ezra's lips. That old thief has been trying to get my hens for years. The small moment of normalcy was so unexpected that Clara found herself smiling in return. How strange that amidst preparations for confrontation, they could still find brief instances of ordinary life. Try to rest, Ezra advised. his voice gentler than usual. Tomorrow may be difficult. Clara nodded, suddenly exhausted now that her vigil was done. As she settled onto her pallet near the sleeping girls, she found her earlier fears temporarily quieted. Whatever came, they would face it together. For now, that was enough. The next day dawned crisp and clear, the mountain air carrying the first fragrant hints of spring. Ezra spent the morning showing Clara and Eleanor how to use the hidden passage from the root cellar, insisting they practice the route until they could navigate it in darkness. The cave entrance is concealed by a thicket of blackberry bushes, he explained. Once there, head east toward the rising sun. There's a shepherd's cabin about 3 miles along the creek. Eleanor, serious as always, committed every instruction to memory. "What if you can't come with us?" she asked bluntly. Ezra met the child's direct gaze with equal frankness. "Then you keep going. The shepherd, old Mac, is trustworthy. Tell him what happened. He'll get you to the federal marshal in Bristol." Clara watched this exchange with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. Eleanor had adapted to their dangerous circumstances with remarkable resilience, but no child should have to contemplate such scenarios. "It won't come to that," Clara insisted, as much for her own reassurance as for Eleanor's. "We'll stay together." Ezra didn't contradict her, but the look he gave her over Eleanor's head conveyed his practical assessment. They needed to be prepared for all outcomes, including the worst. By midday, the final preparations were complete. The cabin was as fortified as they could make it, escape routes established, weapons cleaned and loaded. There was nothing left to do but wait. Lily, seemingly unaffected by the tension that gripped the adults, sat on the porch steps singing softly to her doll. The tune was the same lullaby that had so startled Ezra nights earlier, Eliza's song. "She's been singing that all morning," Clara noted, joining Ezra at the woodpile where he was methodically splitting logs. The physical activity seemed to help him manage his nerves. "It's comforting," Ezra admitted, bringing the axe down with practiced precision. Hearing it again after so long, Clara observed him for a moment, noting the careful control in his movements, the suppressed energy. "You've waited a long time for this," she said. Ezra set another log on the chopping block. 4 years, he confirmed, "but I never imagined it would happen like this." "With us here, you mean?" He nodded, splitting the log with a single powerful stroke. "I thought it would just be him and me. Simpler that way." "I'm sorry we complicated things," Clara said, though she wasn't truly sorry. Without their arrival, Ezra might have continued his solitary existence indefinitely, waiting for a confrontation that might never have come. Ezra rested the axe against the chopping block and turned to face her fully. "Don't apologize," he said, echoing his words from days earlier. "Having you and your sisters here has been," he struggled to find the right word, "clarifying." "Clarifying?" Clara repeated, uncertain of his meaning. "For 4 years, vengeance was all I had," Ezra explained. "All I wanted, but seeing you with Eleanor and Lily, how you've protected them, how you've survived." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "It's reminded me there's more to life than revenge, that after justice there should be something else, something worth living for." The raw honesty in his voice caught Clara unprepared. She had glimpsed the man beneath the grief before, but never so clearly as in this moment. Here was not just the avenger, but a man beginning to consider a future beyond retribution. "There is," she agreed softly. "There has to be." Their eyes held for a long moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then Lily's voice rose from the porch, calling Clara's name, and the moment dissolved. "Duty calls," Clara said with a small smile, turning toward the cabin. Ezra watched her go, his expression thoughtful. Then he returned to his task, each stroke of the axe more purposeful than before. As evening approached, a strange calm settled over the cabin. They ate a simple meal, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. Afterward, Ezra checked the locks and shutters one final time, then positioned himself near the window where he could observe the approach from the forest. Clara sat with the girls near the hearth, reading from one of Eliza's books, a collection of folk tales that had belonged to Ezra's mother before her. Eleanor leaned against Clara's side, her usual vigilance temporarily relaxed by the familiar ritual. Lily, curled on Clara's lap, traced the illustrations with small fingers. The domestic scene struck Ezra with unexpected force. This was what his cabin had been meant for, family, warmth, the simple peace of evening stories. What he and Eliza had dreamed of before fire and hatred had consumed those dreams. Since that fateful night of the fire, he had preserved the cabin as a monument to loss. Now watching Clara and her sisters, he saw its potential as something else, a home, a beginning rather than an ending. The thought was so absorbing that he almost missed the movement at the forest's edge, a shadow detached from the deeper darkness, followed by another. Ezra straightened, all contemplation forgotten as his hand moved to his rifle. "They're here," he said quietly. Clara's reading stopped mid-sentence. She met his eyes across the room, fear and determination warring in her expression. Then she closed the book and set it aside, her movements deliberate. "Girls," she said calmly, "remember what we practiced? It's time to go to the special hiding place." Eleanor immediately stood, taking Lily's hand. The younger girl clutched her doll tightly, her eyes wide but unafraid. "Is it the bad men?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara confirmed, guiding them toward the root cellar. "But remember what I told you. Mr. Sullivan and I will handle them. You just need to stay quiet and hidden." Eleanor nodded solemnly, already leading Lily toward the concealed entrance. Clara followed, helping them into the narrow space beneath the cabin floor. She handed Eleanor a small lantern already lit. "Only use this if you have to move," she instructed. "Otherwise, stay in darkness. And remember, if we hear 3 shots close together, we take the tunnel to the cave," Eleanor recited. "And we wait for you there until dawn. If you don't come, we go to old Mac's cabin." Clara smoothed a hand over Eleanor's hair, pride mingling with sorrow at her sister's composure. "That's right. You take care of Lily, and I'll come for you as soon as it's safe." Lily reached up to touch Clara's cheek. "Don't worry," she said with childish confidence. "The golden-haired lady says it will be all right." Clara managed a smile, though her heart clenched at the innocent faith in her sister's eyes. "I'm sure she's right," she said. "Now be very quiet." She closed the hidden door, ensuring it was secure, then rejoined Ezra by the window. Outside, the full moon cast silver light across the clearing, illuminating 2 mounted figures approaching the cabin. Behind them, a third man waited at the tree line, apparently standing guard with their horses. "Edward and Clay," Clara confirmed, recognizing her uncle's distinctive posture even at a distance. "And one of their men." Ezra nodded, his face set in hard lines. "We let them approach," he said, reviewing their plan. "Let them think they have the advantage. When they enter, I'll confront Clay. You keep your rifle on Edward." Clara adjusted her grip on the weapon, steadying her nerves. They had discussed this strategy repeatedly, but the reality of facing her uncle, the man who had likely orchestrated her parents' deaths, was more daunting than she had anticipated. "Remember," Ezra continued, his voice low and urgent, "if anything goes wrong, you get to your sisters and run. Don't wait for me." Clara wanted to argue, to insist they would leave together or not at all, but she knew her responsibility was to Eleanor and Lily first, so she nodded, accepting his instructions. The approaching riders halted about 20 yards from the cabin. Edward Wilson's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Hello, the house. We're looking for some travelers who may have passed this way." Ezra and Clara exchanged a glance. They had anticipated this approach, the false courtesy, the pretense of innocent inquiry. "Play along," Ezra murmured, moving toward the door. "Let them think we're unsuspecting." He opened the door just wide enough to be visible, keeping his rifle partially hidden behind it. "Who's asking?" he called back. "Edward Wilson," came the reply. "My nieces have run away from home. 3 girls, 1 woman, 2 children. Have you seen them?" Ezra feigned consideration. "Can't say that I have," he answered. "Don't get many visitors this far up the mountain." Edward dismounted, approaching closer. In the moonlight, Clara could see him clearly now, tall and well-dressed, his silver hair gleaming beneath his hat, the very image of respectability. Beside him, Clay Harmon remained mounted, his scarred face partially shadowed. "Mind if we warm ourselves at your fire?" Edward called. "Been riding all day, and the night has a chill." Ezra hesitated as though genuinely considering the request. "I suppose that would be all right," he conceded finally. "Just you 2, though. Your man can wait with the horses." Edward nodded agreeably, gesturing for Clay to dismount. As they approached, Clara positioned herself in the shadows near the hearth, rifle ready, but not immediately visible. Ezra stepped back, allowing the men to enter. Edward removed his hat as he crossed the threshold, revealing the full, distinguished features that had once seemed so trustworthy to Clara. Clay followed, his movements predatory, eyes scanning the cabin's interior with practiced assessment. "Appreciate the hospitality," Edward said smoothly. "Not many folks are welcoming to strangers these days." "Mountain custom," Ezra replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Coffee? That would be welcome." Edward settled into a chair by the fire, while Clay remained standing, his hand resting near his holstered pistol. Clara stayed in the shadows, watching the interaction with tense anticipation. The casual conversation was surreal. These men had destroyed both their lives, yet here they were exchanging pleasantries like ordinary travelers. Ezra moved to the stove, using the activity of preparing coffee to position himself strategically between the men and the root cellar entrance. Clara recognized his intent, ensuring the girl's hiding place remained protected. "You live up here alone?" Clay asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was rougher than Edward's, with a hint of Virginia accent that confirmed Ezra's suspicions about his identity. "I do," Ezra answered simply, not elaborating. Clay's gaze swept the cabin again, noting the female touches that Clara had added during her stay. The clean curtains, the vase of early spring flowers on the table, the neatly folded quilt. "Seems like a woman's been here," he observed. "Recent, too." Ezra shrugged. "My sister visits occasionally." Edward leaned forward, his expression concerned. "Mr. I don't believe I caught your name." "Sullivan," Ezra supplied, turning to face them fully. "Ezra Sullivan." A flicker of recognition passed across Clay's scarred face. "Sullivan, he repeated slowly. "From Virginia?" Ezra nodded, the pretense of hospitality falling away. "The same." Edward glanced between them, momentarily confused by the tension suddenly crackling in the air. "You two know each other?" "We've never met," Ezra said coldly, "but I know Mr. Harmon by reputation and by his handiwork." Understanding dawned in Clay's eyes, followed by a calculating wariness. "Sullivan might," he said again. "The stubborn fellow with the pretty wife. Near Roanoke, wasn't it?" "You remember?" Ezra noted, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm flattered." Edward straightened in his chair, sensing the shift in dynamics. "What's this about, Harmon?" Clay didn't take his eyes off Ezra. "Ancient history," he dismissed. "A business matter that ended unfortunately." "Is that what you call burning a woman alive?" Ezra's control slipped, the rage of 4 years bleeding into his voice. "A business matter?" Clara chose that moment to step forward, her rifle raised and steady. "The same business you conducted with my parents, Uncle Edward?" Edward's head snapped toward her, shock and then fury crossing his aristocratic features. "Clara," he breathed. "So this is where you've been hiding." "With your business partner," she confirmed, moving to stand beside Ezra. "The man who helped you murder my parents." Edward's expression shifted to one of injured innocence. "These are wild accusations," he protested. "I've been searching for you girls out of concern." "Save your lies," Clara interrupted. "Eleanor heard everything that night. Your plans with Mr. Harmon, your intention to permanently handle us after sending us to the orphanage." Clay's hand moved subtly toward his gun. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this rationally." "I've been waiting 4 years for this discussion," Ezra replied, his own gun now openly trained on Clay. "And I'm feeling very rational." The tension in the cabin thickened, a storm about to break. Edward's eyes darted between Clara and Ezra, calculating his options. Clay remained still, but his posture had shifted, poised to move at the slightest opportunity. "Where are your sisters?" Edward asked Clara, his tone conversational despite the weapons pointed at him. "Safe," Clara answered firmly. "Beyond your reach." Edward's smile didn't outreach his eyes. "Nothing is beyond my reach, my dear. Not even this remote cabin." He glanced at Clay. "Isn't that right, Harmon?" Clay nodded almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Wilson owns half the county now," he informed Ezra. "Law enforcement included. No one will believe your accusations." "They will with evidence," Ezra countered. "Eliza kept records, dates, names, details of your operation. And Eleanor's testimony about your conversation the night of the Kentucky fire will corroborate everything. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Clay's scarred face. You're bluffing. My wife was very thorough, Ezra replied. As was I after her death. I've had more than enough time to gather evidence since she died. Edward rose suddenly, his movements betraying the first signs of genuine concern. This has gone far enough, he declared. Clara, where are your sisters? We're leaving. You're not taking them anywhere, Clara said, her rifle unwavering. The only place you're going is to face a federal marshal. Edward's mask of civility slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. You always were stubborn, he said, just like your father. He wouldn't sell either, not even when I explained how beneficial our timber operation would be. So you burned him alive, Clara finished, her voice steady despite the pain the words caused. You and your partner here. Business, Edward echoed Clay's earlier assessment, sometimes requires difficult decisions. Murder isn't business, Ezra countered. It's a hanging offense. Edward smiled thinly. Perhaps in theory, but as Mr. Harmon pointed out, I own considerable influence in this county. My word against yours, a recluse with a vendetta and a runaway girl. In Eleanor's testimony, Clara reminded him, she remembers everything. Children are unreliable witnesses, Edward dismissed, especially when speaking against their legal guardian. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger, rage threatening to overcome her judgment. You will never be near my sisters again, she promised. The standoff stretched, each party assessing their position. Outside, the moon had risen higher, casting long shadows through the windows. The third man remained at the forest's edge, unaware of the confrontation inside. Clay broke the silence, his voice deceptively casual. Mr. Wilson, I believe we've imposed on Mr. Sullivan's hospitality long enough. He turned toward Ezra, his hand still near his holstered gun. We'll be on our way to no harm done. Ezra's laugh held no humor. No harm? He repeated incredulously. You murdered my wife. You helped this man murder Clara's parents. There is harm enough for both of you to hang 10 times over. Then what do you propose? Clay asked, his eyes calculating. You shoot us here? That's murder too, Sullivan. Self-defense, Ezra corrected, against known killers who threatened us. Edward sighed as though disappointed by childish behavior. This posturing is pointless, he declared. Either shoot us or let us leave. But know that if you choose the former, my associate outside will ensure you don't survive the night either. The mention of the third man shifted the balance of power subtly. Ezra and Clara exchanged glances, recalibrating their strategy. They had anticipated this complication, but facing it directly forced a decision. Justice now, with potentially fatal consequences, or a longer game that might allow all of them to survive. Before either could respond, a soft sound came from behind them, the creak of the hidden door to the root cellar. All eyes turned as Eleanor emerged, her small figure straight and dignified despite the fear evident in her face. Eleanor? Clara gasped, dismayed to see her sister expose herself to danger. Go back! But Eleanor shook her head, her gaze fixed on Edward. I heard everything, she said clearly. The night of the fire, you and him, she pointed at Clay. You said fire is the quickest solution. It worked in Virginia, it'll work here. And he laughed and said, as long as no one survives to tell the tale. Edward's face drained of color. Even Clay looked startled at the child's perfect recall of their conversation. You were supposed to be asleep, Edward managed finally. Eleanor's chin lifted. I wasn't. I heard everything. And I remember everything. Clara moved to stand protectively beside her sister. But Eleanor maintained her composure, facing her uncle without flinching. You see, Clara said quietly, we have what we need. Your own words, witnessed by a child with perfect recall. For the first time, genuine alarm registered in Edward's eyes. He turned to Clay, some silent communication passing between them. Clay's hand moved suddenly, drawing his pistol with practiced speed. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Ezra launched himself at Clay, deflecting his aim as the gun discharged. The shot went wild, splintering wood near the ceiling. Clara pushed Eleanor toward the root cellar entrance, raising her own rifle to cover their retreat. Edward seized the moment of chaos to move toward the door, but Clara intercepted him, bringing the butt of her rifle down hard on his outstretched arm. He howled in pain, stumbling backward. Across the room, Ezra and Clay grappled for control of the pistol. Clay's greater size gave him leverage, but Ezra fought with the desperation of a man who had waited years for this moment. They crashed into furniture, upending a table, sending dishes shattering to the floor. Outside, alerted by the gunshot, the third man spurred his horse toward the cabin. "Clara!" Ezra shouted between labored breaths. "The tunnel, now!" She hesitated, torn between following his instruction and helping him subdue Clay. Edward seized her moment of indecision, launching himself at her with surprising strength. They fell together, the rifle trap between them. "You ungrateful child," Edward hissed, his distinguished facade completely gone. "After everything I've done for you." "You killed my parents," Clara gasped, struggling against his weight. "They were in my way," Edward snarled, his hands finding her throat, "just as you are now." Clara fought for breath, spots dancing before her eyes. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard Eleanor screaming, the continuing struggle between Ezra and Clay. And a new sound, hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Just as darkness began to close in, Edward's weight suddenly lifted. Eleanor had leapt onto his back, small fists pounding his head with surprising force. He released Clara to deal with this unexpected attack, giving her the moment she needed to reclaim her rifle. "Get off me, you little hellion," Edward growled, reaching back to dislodge Eleanor. Clara brought the rifle up, but couldn't fire without risking her sister. "Eleanor!" she coughed. "Let go!" Eleanor obeyed instantly, dropping away just as Clara swung the rifle like a club, connecting solidly with Edward's temple. He collapsed, momentarily stunned. Across the cabin, Ezra had gained the upper hand in his struggle with Clay. The larger man was now pinned against the wall, Ezra's forearm pressed against his throat. "You should have stayed away from my mountain," Ezra said, his voice deadly quiet. Clay's scarred face contorted with effort as he fought for breath. "You can't prove anything," he managed. "I don't need to prove it to know the truth," Ezra replied, "but a federal marshal might be interested in the evidence Eliza collected, and in Eleanor's testimony." A flicker of doubt crossed Clay's face, followed by renewed struggle. He was a powerful man, and desperation lent him additional strength. With a roar, he pushed back against Ezra, breaking his hold. The door burst open, the third man appearing with gun drawn. "Boss," he called, taking in the chaotic scene. Clay seized the distraction to dive for his fallen pistol. Ezra moved to intercept him, but the newcomer's gun tracked his movement. Time seemed to slow again. Clara saw the third man's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Ezra exposed and vulnerable in the open space between them. Without conscious thought, she raised her rifle and fired. The report was deafening in the confined space. The third man staggered, clutching his shoulder where Clara's shot had struck. His own gun discharged harmlessly into the floor as he fell. The moment of shock that followed gave Clay the opportunity to retrieve his weapon. He aimed at Ezra, triumph evident in his scarred features. "Now we end this," he declared. Before he could fire, a new voice spoke from the doorway. A woman's voice, clear and commanding. "Drop your weapon, Mr. Harmon." All eyes turned to see the slender figure silhouetted against the moonlight, a shotgun steady in her hands. "Mrs. Thornton?" Clara breathed, recognizing the pastor's wife. Anna Thornton stepped fully into the cabin, her normally gentle features set in determined lines. Behind her, several more figures appeared, men from town, also armed. "My husband was concerned when these men were asking about young women traveling alone," she explained, keeping her shotgun trained on Clay. "He gathered some trustworthy neighbors and followed them up here." Clay's expression hardened, but he recognized the shifted odds. Slowly, he lowered his pistol. "This is a misunderstanding," he tried again, his tone reasonable. "Mr. Wilson was searching for his runaway nieces. I was merely assisting." "Then you won't mind explaining that to the federal marshal," Mrs. Thornton replied. "He arrived in Oak Ridge this afternoon, quite interested in reports of timber companies using arson to secure land rights." Edward, recovering from Clara's blow, stared at Mrs. Thornton with undisguised contempt. "You're making a serious mistake," he warned. "I have considerable influence. In Kentucky, perhaps," she interrupted calmly. "But you'll find Virginia mountains have their own ways, and we protect our own." Her gaze shifted to Ezra, including him in that statement. He nodded once, acknowledging the unexpected alliance. The townsmen moved into the cabin, securing Clay and the wounded third man. Edward attempted to maintain his dignity as his hands were bound, but the aristocratic mask had slipped beyond recovery. "Eleanor," Clara called softly, "you can come out now. It's safe." Eleanor emerged from her hiding place behind an overturned chair, her small face solemn. Lily followed, clutching her doll with one hand and Eleanor's dress with the other. "Are the bad men going away?" Lily asked, her eyes wide as she took in the crowded cabin. "Yes, sweetheart," Clara assured her, gathering both sisters close. "They're going away for a very long time." As the townsmen led their prisoners out to waiting horses, Mrs. Thornton approached Clara and the girls. "Pastor sent word to the marshal yesterday," she explained. "As soon as these men started asking questions in town, he remembered your arrival and suspected you might be in danger." "Thank you," Clara said fervently. "I don't know how we can repay such kindness." Mrs. Thornton smiled, her usual gentleness returning now that the danger had passed. "There's no debt between neighbors," she said simply. Then glancing around the disheveled cabin, she added, "Though you might need help setting things right here." Clara surveyed the damage: broken furniture, shattered dishes, bloodstains on the floor. The physical manifestation of violence seemed at odds with the peace they had briefly found in this place. Yet beneath the destruction, the cabin remained sound. Its walls still stood, its hearth still offered warmth. Like Ezra himself, Clara thought, looking to where he stood conferring with the townsmen, scarred but enduring, perhaps capable of healing, given time and care. Mrs. Thornton followed her gaze, a knowing look crossing her motherly features. "He's been alone too long," she observed quietly. "It does a soul no good, that kind of solitude." Clara nodded, unable to disagree but unwilling to acknowledge the implication. "We've all been through much," she said instead. "Indeed," Mrs. Thornton agreed, "but the storm has passed now. What comes next is up to you." As the last of the prisoners were led away, Ezra returned to Clara's side. His face bore a fresh cut on one cheek, and he moved with the stiffness of developing bruises, but his eyes held something Clara hadn't seen before, a lightness, as though a great weight had been lifted. "It's over," he said simply. Clara nodded, her own emotions too complex for words. Relief, exhaustion, grief for all that had been lost, tentative hope for what might be possible now, all swirled within her like leaves caught in a mountain stream. "What happens now?" she asked. Ezra looked around the cabin at the destruction, yes, but also at the girls huddled together near the hearth, at Clara herself standing steady despite everything she'd endured. "Now," he said, "we rebuild." The word hung between them, laden with possibilities neither was ready to fully examine, but it was enough for the moment. A promise, perhaps, or at least an invitation to consider a future beyond survival. Outside, the full moon continued its arc across the sky, bathing the clearing in silver light. The shadows that had threatened them had been vanquished, leaving only the natural darkness of the mountain night, peaceful rather than menacing. Clara gathered her sisters closer, feeling their small bodies warm against her sides. They were safe after months of fear and flight. They were finally, truly safe. And in that realization, she allowed herself to consider Ezra's words. "We rebuild." Not I, but we. The difference was small but profound, a shift from solitude to connection, from past to future. As the adrenaline of confrontation faded, leaving exhaustion in its wake, Clara found herself ready to embrace that difference, to see where it might lead. Tomorrow would bring questions, decisions, the practical matters of statements to the marshal and testimony at trials. But tonight, in this moment of quiet after the storm, there was only relief and the first fragile seedling of hope. Across the room, Ezra met her eyes, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They had survived the worst that Edward and Clay could bring. They had protected Eleanor and Lily. They had honored the memories of those they'd lost by bringing their killers to justice. Now, perhaps, they could begin to honor those same memories by living. Not just surviving, but truly living again. The thought brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to give sorrow any more power over her. Instead, she smiled at Ezra, a small but genuine expression of gratitude and possibility. He returned the smile, hesitant but real, And in that moment, the cabin seemed to exhale, as though the very walls had been holding their breath, waiting for this resolution. "We rebuild," Clara agreed softly, the words a promise to herself as much as to him. Together. Dawn broke over the Appalachian Mountains with a gentle persistence, rose gold light filtering through the eastern windows of Ezra's cabin. Clara stood on the porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming her hands as she watched the sunrise transform the landscape. The aftermath of the previous night's violence still lingered inside. Broken furniture, blood-stained floorboards, the lingering scent of gunpowder. But out here, nature continued its ancient rhythms undisturbed. 4 days had passed since Edward Wilson and Clay Harmon had been taken to the county jail to await trial. 4 days of statements to the federal marshal, of Eleanor recounting with perfect clarity the damning conversation she had overheard. 4 days of beginning the slow process of rebuilding, both the physical cabin and the lives that had been shattered by violence and loss. Clara took a sip of coffee, savoring its warmth. Behind her, the cabin door opened, and Ezra stepped out, his own cup in hand. He moved with the stiffness of healing bruises, but his eyes were clearer than she had ever seen them, the haunted shadow that had dimmed them since her arrival finally beginning to lift. "You're up early," he observed, joining her at the railing. "Couldn't sleep," Clara admitted. "Too many thoughts." Ezra nodded in understanding. The silent companionship they had developed over the past weeks deepened in the wake of shared danger. Words seemed unnecessary between them now, a mutual recognition flowing beneath the surface of everyday interactions. "Marshal Daniels will be back today," Ezra reminded her, "for the final statements before they transport Wilson and Harmon to Richmond." Clara nodded, her stomach tightening at the thought of facing her uncle again, even in the formal setting of legal proceedings. "Will Eleanor need to testify at the trial?" "The marshal thinks her deposition might be enough, especially with the evidence from Eliza's journals. But if it comes to trial, yes, she may need to appear." Ezra studied Clara's profile, noting the tension in her jaw. "You've prepared her well. She's remarkably composed for a child her age." "Too composed," Clara sighed. "She's had to grow up so quickly." They both have. Inside the cabin, the sound of movement signaled the girl's awakening. Eleanor's voice drifted through the open door as she helped Lily dress for the day. The domestic sounds anchored Clara in the present, a reminder of why all of this mattered, why justice wasn't merely about vengeance, but about securing a future for her sisters. "What will you do after?" Ezra asked, the question he had been carefully avoiding for days finally finding voice. "When this is all settled, I mean." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. The question had hovered between them, unspoken but ever present. Her original plan, to reach Oregon, to start fresh where no one knew them, seemed distant now, a relic from another life. "I don't know," she admitted. "For so long, running was the only plan. Now," she trailed off, uncertain how to articulate the shift in her thinking. Ezra nodded, not pressing for more. Instead, he gazed out at the mountains, their ancient slopes softened by morning mist. "This land has a way of claiming people," he said after a moment, "of putting down roots in you as much as you put them down in it." Clara understood his meaning. In the short weeks since their arrival, something had changed. The cabin no longer felt like a temporary shelter, but like the beginning of something permanent. The garden she had started to tend, the curtains she had sewn from spare fabric, the evening routine of stories by the fire, all spoke to a settling in, a claiming of space. "The girls like it here," she said, testing the waters. Eleanor has stopped looking over her shoulder. "And Lily," she smiled, thinking of her youngest sister's newfound joy. "Lily talks to the chickens as if they understand every word." Ezra's lips curved in response. "They probably do. Smartest chickens in the county." The small joke, unexpected from the usually somber man, warmed Clara more than the coffee. These moments had become more frequent, brief glimpses of the person Ezra must have been before grief reshaped him. "I've been thinking," he continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. "This cabin was built for a family. It stood half empty too long." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "If you and your sisters wanted to stay, there would be a place for you here. Permanently." Clara turned to face him fully, searching his expression. "Are you offering us charity, Mr. Sullivan?" No, he answered quickly, then more softly. No, not charity. The unspoken implications hung between them, as tangible as the morning mist. Clara felt her heart quicken, a mixture of hope and uncertainty rising within her. Before she could respond, the cabin door swung open again, and Lily bounded out, her doll tucked securely under one arm. Clara, Mr. Ezra, she called excitedly. The golden-haired lady says we're going to stay forever and be a family. The innocent announcement froze both adults, their eyes meeting over Lily's head. Clara recovered first, kneeling to smooth her sister's tousled hair. Lily, sweetheart, what did we say about sharing private conversations? Lily's brow furrowed in confusion. But it wasn't private. The golden-haired lady told me to tell you. She said you both were being too slow and needed a little push. She emphasized this last part with a serious nod, clearly quoting verbatim. Ezra made a choking sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. When Clara glanced up at him, his eyes held a mixture of amusement and something deeper. A question, perhaps, or an invitation. Well, he said quietly, it seems Eliza has opinions on the matter. The mention of his late wife's name, spoken not with grief but with a kind of wry acceptance, marked a profound shift. Ezra was acknowledging the inexplicable connection between his past and present, the mysterious way Lily seemed to communicate with Eliza's spirit. She does, doesn't she? Clara replied, rising to her feet. Their eyes held for a long moment, understanding passing between them without words. Then Eleanor appeared in the doorway, pragmatic as always. Breakfast is ready, she announced, and Lily spilled the flour again. The spell broke, replaced by the immediate demands of the day. But as they returned inside, Ezra's hand brushed Clara's briefly, a touch so light it might have been accidental, yet it carried the weight of promise. Marshal Daniels arrived shortly after noon, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the porch as he dismounted. Clara had met him several times since the confrontation, a serious man in his 50s with graying hair and the steady gaze of someone who had seen humanity at its worst, yet maintained his faith in justice. Miss Wilson, he greeted her, removing his hat. Or Sullivan? Marshal, they responded in unison, ushering him inside where Eleanor and Lily waited. The cabin had been restored to some semblance of order. Broken furniture had been removed, bloodstains scrubbed from floorboards, shattered dishes replaced with new ones from town. Yet the space still held the memory of violence, an invisible scar that would take time to fade. I won't keep you long, Daniels assured them, accepting the coffee Clara offered. Just need to confirm a few details before the transfer to Richmond tomorrow. Eleanor sat straighter, her small face composed as it always was when discussing the events that had shattered their family. Lily, less interested in legal proceedings, retreated to a corner with her doll, humming softly to herself. The evidence you provided has been invaluable, the marshal continued, addressing Ezra. Your wife's journals document a pattern of intimidation and arson across 3 counties. With Eleanor's testimony about the Kentucky fire, we have a solid case against both men. What charges will they face? Clara asked, though she had heard the answer before. Something in her needed the reassurance of hearing it again, that Edward and Clay would truly pay for their crimes. Murder, arson, conspiracy, fraud, Daniels listed. The federal prosecutor is confident they'll hang, especially with the additional evidence that surfaced after their arrest. Additional evidence? Ezra questioned. Daniels nodded, setting down his cup. Once word spread of their capture, other victims came forward. 3 more families in Virginia who lost property to suspicious fires. A widow in Tennessee whose husband died in a logging accident after refusing to sell. And most damning, a former associate of Harmon's who's willing to testify about their methods. Clara absorbed this information, a complex mixture of emotions washing through her. Justice was coming, more comprehensive than she had dared hope. Yet it wouldn't bring back her parents or Ezra's wife. It wouldn't restore the years of fear and loss. What about our land in Kentucky? Eleanor asked suddenly, her practical mind focused on concrete matters. Does it still belong to Uncle Edward? Marshal Daniels smiled gently at the child. No, Miss Eleanor. Your father's will left everything to you 3 girls. Your uncle's guardianship gave him temporary control, but not ownership. Once this is settled, the property will be legally yours. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. We don't want to live there anymore, she declared. There are too many sad memories. The marshal glanced between Clara and Ezra, noting the unspoken communication that passed between them. I understand you've been considering your options, he said diplomatically. Clara met Ezra's eyes briefly before responding. We're still discussing the future. Of course, Daniels nodded, not pressing further. He turned to Eleanor. Now, young lady, I need to review your statement once more. Are you ready? Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Yes, sir. I remember everything exactly as it happened. As Eleanor recounted her testimony with the precision that had so impressed the authorities, Clara watched the child who had become so much more than a sister to her. In many ways, Eleanor had been her partner in survival, shouldering burdens no child should bear. The thought of giving her a stable home, a chance at a normal childhood, tugged at Clara's heart. Her gaze shifted to Ezra, who was listening intently to Eleanor's account. His face remained serious, but his eyes held a softness when they rested on the child. Over the past weeks, he had shown unexpected patience with the girls, teaching Eleanor to whittle, answering Lily's endless questions, respecting their trauma while encouraging their resilience. When the marshal finished his questions, he turned to Lily, who was still playing contentedly in her corner. And you, little miss, is there anything you remember that might help us? Lily looked up, considering the question with solemn gravity. The golden-haired lady says Mr. Clay is a very bad man who hurts people, she stated matter-of-factly. And Uncle Edward has a black heart. An awkward silence followed this pronouncement. Marshal Daniels cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to respond to the child's strange statement. Lily has an active imagination, Claire explained hastily. Imaginary friends are common at her age, the marshal nodded, though his expression remained puzzled. Well, I believe that concludes our business for today. He gathered his papers, tucking them into a leather portfolio. The trial won't begin for several months, but with the evidence we have, I don't anticipate you'll need to appear in Richmond unless specifically called. And they'll remain in custody until then? Clara confirmed, needing the reassurance. Under heavy guard, Daniels affirmed. They have powerful friends, but none willing to risk association with murder charges. As the marshal prepared to leave, he paused on the porch, turning to Clara with a more personal expression. Miss Wilson, if I may speak frankly, you've shown remarkable courage through this ordeal. Your sisters are fortunate to have you. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the unexpected praise. I've only done what was necessary. No, Daniels disagreed gently. You've done far more. Not everyone would have pursued justice at such cost. Not everyone would have protected those children with such determination. He glanced back at the cabin, then at Ezra, who stood a respectful distance away. You deserve peace after all this. I hope you find it. With that, he mounted his horse and departed, leaving Clara to consider his words. Peace had seemed such a distant concept for so long, a luxury she couldn't afford while focused on mere survival. Now, with Edward and Clay facing justice, with the immediate danger past, she could finally contemplate what peace might look like. Her eyes found Ezra, who was watching the marshal's departure with a thoughtful expression. He had found no peace in his years of isolation, she knew. Vengeance had sustained him, but it hadn't healed him. Perhaps, like her, he was only now beginning to imagine a life beyond survival. He's right, you know, Ezra said quietly, coming to stand beside her. What you've done for your sisters, it's remarkable. I had help, Clara replied, meeting his gaze directly. I wouldn't have made it this far alone. Something shifted in Ezra's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Nor would I, he admitted. Having you and the girls here, it's been, he struggled to find the right words. It's reminded me what living feels like. Not just existing, but living. The confession, simple yet profound, reached something deep within Clara. For years, she too had been merely existing, moving from one crisis to the next, focused solely on keeping her sisters safe. The space for Barney and Joy, for connection, for anything beyond survival, had been luxury she couldn't afford. Yet here, in this cabin on a remote mountainside, she had found moments of peace despite the danger. Watching Eleanor learn to whittle under Ezra's patient guidance, hearing Lily's laughter as she collected eggs from the henhouse, sitting on the porch in the evening silence, sharing coffee and conversation with a man who understood loss as intimately as she did. I should check on the girls, Clara said finally, overwhelmed by the realization of how much had changed, how much she had changed in these few weeks. Ezra nodded, respecting her need for distance. I'll be in the workshop if you need me. As he walked away, Clara watched his retreating figure, noting the straightness of his shoulders that had once been perpetually hunched with grief. He moved differently now, with purpose rather than merely momentum. The change mirrored something shifting within herself, a cautious reawakening, a tentative reaching toward possibility. Inside, she found Eleanor teaching Lily to knit with spare yarn and whittled sticks. The domesticity of the scene brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. This was what she had fought for, not just their survival, but the chance for normalcy, for simple pleasures untainted by fear. Clara? Eleanor looked up, concern crossing her face. Is something wrong? Clara shook her head, blinking back tears. No, nothing's wrong. I was just thinking how proud I am of both of you, how brave you've been. Eleanor's expression softened, the adult composure she usually maintained giving way to the child beneath. Are we going to stay here? She asked directly. With Mr. Ezra? The question hung in the air, laden with hope and uncertainty. Clara sat beside her sisters, gathering her thoughts. Would you like that? She asked carefully. Lily nodded enthusiastically. The golden-haired lady says this is our home now, and Mr. Ezra needs us. Eleanor was more measured, considering the question with her usual thoughtfulness. He's kind, she said finally, and he doesn't treat us like we're broken because of what happened. And she hesitated, a rare vulnerability showing through. I feel safe here. Safety, such a simple concept, yet one that had eluded them for so long. Clara understood exactly what Eleanor meant. Despite the violence that had found them here, the cabin had become a sanctuary, a place where they could exhale, where the constant vigilance of the past months could finally ease. I think we could be happy here, Clara admitted, but it's a big decision. It would mean changing our plans, settling here instead of going west. Oregon was just a place on a map, Eleanor pointed out with practical wisdom. We were only going there because it was far from Uncle Edward, but he can't hurt us anymore. Clara smoothed her sister's hair, marveling at the clarity with which the child saw their situation. No, he can't, she agreed, not anymore. So we can stay, Lily pressed, bouncing slightly with excitement. We need to talk to Mr. Sullivan first, Clara cautioned. It's his home. He needs to be certain about inviting us to stay permanently. He already asked you, Eleanor reminded her, ever observant, this morning on the porch. I heard him. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks again. Eavesdropping isn't polite, Eleanor. I wasn't trying to, Eleanor defended herself, but the window was open, and you were right outside. She paused, fixing Clara with a serious gaze. He wants us to stay. Why didn't you say yes? The direct question, delivered with a child's uncompromising honesty, caught Clara unprepared. Why hadn't she accepted Ezra's offer immediately? The reasons seemed complex and simple all at once. It's a big decision, she repeated. For all of us, including Mr. Sullivan, I want to be sure it's right. Eleanor studied her with those two perceptive eyes. You're afraid, she concluded, but not of Mr. Sullivan. You're afraid of being happy again. The insight, so accurate it was almost painful, left Clara momentarily speechless. When had her little sister become so wise? Or had Clara simply been too focused on survival to notice the depth of understanding developing in Eleanor's young mind? Perhaps I am, she acknowledged finally. It's been so long since we had anything stable, since we could trust anyone outside ourselves. I trust him, Eleanor said simply. Me too, Lily chimed in. And the golden-haired lady says he needs a family again. He's been alone too long. Clara considered her sister's words, recognizing the truth in them. Ezra had been alone too long, isolated with his grief and thirst for vengeance. And they had been running too long, surviving but not living. Perhaps they had found each other exactly when they needed to, broken pieces that together might form something whole again. I'll talk to him, she promised, tonight after you're in bed. This seemed to satisfy the girls, who returned to their knitting lesson with renewed focus. Clara watched them for a moment longer, then rose to begin preparations for dinner. As she worked, her mind turned over possibilities, examining the shape of the future that might await them if they stayed. Making this arrangement permanent would present its own challenges. Ezra had grown accustomed to solitude, with routines and habits molded around being alone with his grief. The cabin itself, once a monument to loss, would need to transform into a true home. And while Clara's sisters showed remarkable resilience, their scars ran deep. Eleanor's watchfulness, Lily's attachment to the mysterious golden-haired lady. These weren't wounds that would fade with a simple change of address, but rather needed patient nurturing to truly heal. But perhaps that was the point. They would heal together, supporting each other through the process of rebuilding their lives. Not perfect, not unmarked by their experiences, but whole in a new way. Connected in their shared understanding of loss and survival. By the time Ezra returned from his workshop, dust from woodworking clinging to his clothes, Clara had reached a kind of clarity. The dinner she prepared was more elaborate than usual, a small celebration of their survival, of justice and progress, of possibilities opening before them. The meal passed in comfortable conversation, the girls sharing their activities of the day, Ezra describing the cabinet he was building for a family in town. Domestic normality, unremarkable except for how precious it had become to all of them. When dinner was finished and the girls prepared for bed, Clara found herself both eager and nervous for the conversation to come. She tucked Eleanor and Lily into the small room that had once been Ezra's workshop, converted to a bedroom in the days after the confrontation. "Clara?" Lily asked sleepily as Clara smoothed the quilt around her small form. "Yes, sweetheart? Are you going to tell Mr. Ezra, yes?" Clara smiled, brushing blonde hair from Lily's forehead. "Go to sleep, little one. Tomorrow will bring its own answers." Eleanor, more aware of the significance of the coming conversation, simply squeezed Clara's hand before settling under her own quilt. "It will be all right," she murmured. "Whatever you decide." Clara kissed each sister goodnight, then closed the door gently behind her. In the main room, Ezra was stoking the fire, his movements deliberate and practiced. The domestic scene, a man tending his hearth, children sleeping safely nearby, struck Clara with unexpected force. This was what a home should be: simple, secure, filled with quiet care. "They're asleep?" Ezra asked, glancing up as she approached. "Nearly," Clara confirmed, "though I think they are too excited about the marshal's visit to sleep right away." Ezra nodded, returning his attention to the fire. "It's good news about the additional witnesses. Makes the case against Wilson and Harmon even stronger." "Yes," Clara agreed, settling into a chair near the hearth. "Though part of me wishes it hadn't come to this, that others hadn't suffered as we did." "Nature of men like them," Ezra observed grimly. "They don't stop at one crime. Once they find a method that works, they repeat it." The fire crackled between them, casting warm light across the cabin's interior. Outside, night had fallen completely, the mountain darkness thick and velvety beyond the windows. In this cocoon of light and warmth, Clara found the courage to address what had been unspoken between them. "This morning on the porch," she began, "you said something about us staying permanently." Ezra's hand stilled on the poker. He set it aside carefully before turning to face her. "I did." "Did you mean it?" Clara asked directly, Eleanor's straightforward approach influencing her own. "Or was it just a kind offer in the moment?" "I meant it," Ezra replied without hesitation. "This cabin was built for a family. It stood half empty these 4 years, holding memories but little life." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Having you and the girls here has reminded me what it was meant for." Clara studied his face in the firelight, noting the openness there, the vulnerability he was allowing her to see. "The girls would like to stay," she said carefully. "They feel safe here." "And you?" Ezra asked, his voice low. "What do you feel, Clara?" The question, direct yet gentle, demanded honesty. Clara took a deep breath, choosing her words with care. "I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads," she admitted. "For so long, all I focused on was getting us away, keeping us safe. Now that we are safe, I'm not sure what comes next." Ezra nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The day after Eliza died," he said quietly, "I woke up and realized I had no plan beyond getting through that single day. The future was just blank. It took me years to even consider what might come next. And now, Clara prompted softly, what do you see now? Ezra's gaze held hers, steady and sure. I'm starting to imagine things I never thought possible after Eliza died. This cabin was meant to echo with children's voices and hold moments of quiet companionship. When I look at you with Eleanor and Lily, I don't just see guests anymore. I see the possibility of healing, not just existing in the shadow of what happened, but building something new from the broken pieces. The words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within Clara. She too had been defined by loss for too long, shaped by absence rather than presence, by fear rather than hope. It wouldn't be easy, she cautioned. The girls have nightmares sometimes. Eleanor still struggles to trust anyone outside our family. She hesitated. I'm still learning how to live without constantly looking over my shoulder. I have my own demons, Ezra acknowledged. Days when grief still overwhelms me. Habits of solitude that won't change overnight. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. But perhaps that's why this could work. We understand each other's brokenness. We don't expect perfection. Clara considered his words, finding truth in them. There would be no need to pretend with Ezra, no facade of wholeness when they both carried such visible scars. There was freedom in that shared understanding, a foundation on which something genuine could be built. There's something else we should discuss, she said carefully. If we stay, what would our arrangement be? Ezra straightened, understanding the delicacy of the question. That decision rests entirely with you, he answered thoughtfully. What I'm proposing is shelter, stability, a chance for your sisters to grow up without fear. I want to be clear that this offer stands on its own, with no expectations attached. Your presence here, the life you three have brought back to this place, that's already more than I could have hoped for. And if more developed over time, Clara asked, her heart beating faster at her own boldness. If we found ourselves becoming more than housemates? A flush rose on Ezra's cheekbones, visible even in the dim light. Then we would address it honestly, he answered. But I want to be clear, that's not why I'm asking you to stay. The girls need stability, and you deserve peace after everything you've endured. That's enough reason. The sincerity in his voice reassured Clara more than flowery promises might have. Ezra was offering them a home without conditions, without expectations beyond mutual respect and care. Yet he wasn't closing the door on deeper connections that might develop naturally, given time and healing. I think, Clara said slowly, that we would like to stay, to make this our home, if you're certain. The smile that transformed Ezra's face was like sunrise after a long night, gradual but brilliant, changing everything it touched. I'm certain, he confirmed. Something lightened in Clara's chest, a tension she hadn't fully recognized until it released. The decision felt right, not just practically, but intuitively. This remote cabin, found through chance and deception, had become the sanctuary they had been seeking all along. We'll need to make some arrangements, she said, practical matters coming to the forefront now that the larger question was settled. The girls should start school when the term begins. And there's the matter of our property in Kentucky. It should be sold, the money set aside for their future. Ezra nodded, shifting smoothly into practical partnership. The school is small but good. Mrs. Thornton teaches the younger children. And I know a fair attorney in Richmond who could handle the property sale without requiring your presence in Kentucky. They continued discussing logistics, mapping out the practicalities of their new arrangement with a comfortable synchronicity that felt both novel and natural. As the fire burned lower, casting the cabin in amber shadows, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a feeling of pieces finally falling into place. It's getting late, Ezra observed eventually, noticing Clara stifling a yawn. We should both rest. Tomorrow will bring plenty to do. Clara nodded, rising from her chair. At the door to the girls' room, she paused, turning back to where Ezra still sat by the hearth. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. His smile was gentle in the fading firelight. No thanks needed between family, he replied. The word, family, hung in the air between them, potent with meaning. Not a legal designation yet, nor a formal arrangement, but something organic and real nonetheless. They were becoming a family, knitted together by shared experience, mutual understanding, and the daily acts of care that constituted a true home. Clara carried that thought with her into sleep, a peaceful certainty that had been absent for too long. Spring unfolded across the mountains with vibrant persistence, wildflowers dotting the forest floor, new green leaves unfurling on the trees that surrounded the cabin. With the changing season came a gradual transformation within the household as well, tentative at first, then blooming with increasing confidence. The cabin expanded to accommodate its new permanent residents. Ezra and Clara worked side by side to convert his workshop into a proper bedroom for the girls, adding windows to catch the morning light, building beds to replace the temporary pallets. Clara sewed curtains and quilts, creating a cheerful space where her sisters could establish their own sanctuary. The garden doubled in size, rows of vegetables promising summer abundance. Eleanor took particular interest in this project, working alongside Ezra to prepare soil and plant seeds, absorbing his knowledge of mountain-growing seasons with her characteristic intensity. Lily flourished in the security of their new home, her natural joyfulness emerging more fully as the shadows of fear receded. She named each chicken in the coop, created elaborate stories for her doll, and continued her mysterious conversations with the golden-haired lady without self-consciousness. More surprising was the change in Ezra himself. The man who had greeted them with reluctant hospitality now moved through his days with renewed purpose. He still had quiet periods, moments when grief would catch him unaware, but they no longer defined him. Instead, he seemed to be rediscovering parts of himself that had been dormant. His humor, his patience, his capacity for joy. 6 weeks after their decision to stay, Pastor and Mrs. Thornton invited them to Sunday dinner after church, the first social engagement they had accepted as a family. The invitation represented more than a meal. It was an acknowledgement of their new status in the community, a welcome that extended beyond the immediate crisis that had brought them together. "Are you nervous?" Ezra asked Clara as they prepared for the visit, noting the extra care she took with the girls' appearance and her own. Clara smoothed her best dress, one of two she had managed to bring from Kentucky, and smiled ruefully. "A little," she admitted. "It's been a long time since we were part of any community, and the circumstances of our arrival were hardly conventional." Ezra's expression softened. "This town has its faults, but it values resilience. What you've done for your sisters, people respect that." His words bolstered her confidence, as did the easy way he interacted with Eleanor and Lily, helping Eleanor with a stubborn button, complimenting Lily on her neatly braided hair. These small gestures of care had become routine, each one strengthening the bonds between them. The Thorntons' home was modest but welcoming, filled with the aroma of roasting chicken and freshly baked bread. Anna Thornton greeted them warmly, her motherly affection extending especially to the girls, whom she ushered in with genuine delight. "Eleanor, my dear, I've heard you've become quite the gardener," she said, drawing the older girl into conversation. "You must tell me your secrets. My carrots never grow as straight as yours seem to." Pastor Thornton clapped Ezra on the shoulder, a gesture of fellowship that would have been unthinkable months earlier when Ezra had kept himself isolated from all social contact. "Good to see you, Sullivan. You're looking well." Clara watched the interactions with a mixture of pleasure and lingering wariness. Part of her still expected judgment for the unconventional nature of their arrangement, for the violence that had followed them to this peaceful community. Instead, she found only warmth and acceptance. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed easily. Pastor Thornton described plans for the church's expansion, while his wife shared news of upcoming school activities. Lily charmed everyone with her innocent observations, and even Eleanor relaxed enough to discuss her gardening projects with animation. "We've received word from Marshall Daniels," Pastor Thornton mentioned, as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "The trial date has been set for September. He believes the proceedings will be brief, given the evidence." Clara nodded, a familiar tightness returning to her chest at the reminder of what still lay ahead. Though Edward and Clay were securely imprisoned, the specter of the trial, of facing them again, of reliving the traumas they had inflicted, cast a shadow over their newfound peace. "Will you need to attend?" Mrs. Thornton asked gently. "Perhaps," Claire answered, "though the marshal hopes our depositions will be sufficient." "Either way," Ezra said, his voice steady beside her, "we'll face it together." The simple affirmation, delivered without drama or excessive sentiment, reassured Clara more than elaborate promises might have. Together, the word contained multitudes: support, partnership, shared burden. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Thornton drew Clara aside, her kind face serious. "I want you to know," she said quietly, "that you've been good for him. Before you came, Ezra was fading, living in the past, consumed by what he'd lost." She glanced to where Ezra stood on the porch, listening patiently to Lily's elaborate story about a rabbit she'd seen in the garden. Now he's present again, engaged with life. Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks at the observation. "He's been good for us too," she replied. "I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't found our way here." Mrs. Thornton patted her hand. "Providence works in mysterious ways, dear. Sometimes the path we least expect is exactly the one we need." The ride home was peaceful, the spring twilight gentle around them. Lily fell asleep against Clara's side, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Eleanor gazed out at the passing scenery, occasionally pointing out interesting plants or birds to Ezra, who answered her questions with thoughtful attention. Clara observed them all, a profound gratitude welling within her. 6 months ago, she had been desperate and terrified, fleeing with her sisters toward an uncertain future. Now they were returning to a home that was truly theirs, surrounded by people who cared for them, with a future that held promise rather than mere survival. When they reached the cabin, Ezra carried sleeping Lily inside while Clara helped a drowsy Eleanor prepare for bed. The domestic routine flowed smoothly, each person's role established through weeks of practice. By the time the girls were settled, the main room had fallen into twilight shadows, peaceful in the day's end. Clara found Ezra on the porch, gazing at the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky. She joined him in what had become their evening ritual, a few moments of quiet companionship after the girls were asleep. "It was a good day," she observed, leaning against the railing beside him. Ezra nodded, his profile thoughtful in the gathering darkness. "It was, though I saw your worry when Pastor mentioned the trial." Clara sighed, not surprised by his perception. Over the weeks, they had developed an attunement to each other's moods and concerns, an unspoken awareness that didn't require explanation. "I don't fear for our safety anymore," she clarified. "But the thought of facing them again, of Eleanor possibly having to testify, it brings it all back." Ezra turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "This trial is the final thread connecting us to that dark chapter," he said, his expression resolute. "When the judge's gavel falls, it won't just be legal justice. It'll be our freedom from their shadow. After that, our story belongs entirely to us, not to them." The quiet confidence in his voice steadied Clara. He was right. The trial would be an ending as well as an ordeal, a closing of the chapter that had defined their lives for too long. "Mrs. Thornton said something interesting today," she mentioned, after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "About Providence bringing us here, to this place." Ezra's lips curved slightly. "Pastor's wife is a wise woman." "Do you believe that?" Clara asked, curious about his perspective. "That we were meant to find each other?" He considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. 4 years ago, I would have said no. After Eliza died, I couldn't see any purpose in what happened, only random cruelty. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But now, seeing how our separate tragedies led us here, to this moment, it's harder to dismiss the possibility of some greater design. Clara nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The convergence of their paths had been too precise, too meaningful to feel entirely coincidental. The same evil men had shattered both their lives. Together they had found justice and begun healing. "Lily seems convinced," she noted with a small smile. "According to her, the golden-haired lady orchestrated everything." Ezra chuckled softly, the sound still novel enough to warm Clara's heart. "Eliza always did like to arrange things," he admitted. "She'd have approved of you and your sisters, I think, of the life we're building." And the simple statement, offered without hesitation or doubt, touched Clara deeply. To be accepted not just by Ezra but by the memory of his beloved wife, acknowledged as a continuation rather than a replacement, meant more than she could express. "Thank you for saying that," she managed finally. Ezra turned toward her fully, his expression earnest in the fading light. It's the truth. Eliza would have wanted me to live again, not just exist. It took me far too long to understand that. Clara met his gaze, seeing in it a clarity that matched her own emerging certainty. The past weeks had brought not just security, but a gradual awakening of possibilities neither had dared consider in the midst of their separate griefs. "And are you," she asked softly, "living again?" Ezra's hand found hers on the railing, the touch gentle but deliberate. "Yes," he answered simply. "Thanks to you and your sisters. Thanks to the family we're becoming." The word, family, no longer felt tentative or hypothetical. It had substance now, built through daily acts of care and trust, through shared meals and evening stories, through the slow healing they had undertaken together. Clara turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining in the growing darkness. No words were necessary in that moment, just the quiet acknowledgement of connection, of paths converging, of wounds becoming scars that no longer define them. Inside the cabin, Lily's voice drifted through the partially open window as she spoke to her invisible companion. "See," they heard her say triumphantly, "I told you they just needed time. You were right all along." Ezra and Clara exchanged glances, amusement mingling with something deeper. Perhaps Lily's golden-haired lady was just a child's imagination, a way of processing trauma and change. Or perhaps something more mysterious was at work, a guardian spirit watching over their emerging family, guiding them toward healing. Either way, as they stood together in the gentle spring night, hands joined and future opening before them, Clara found herself profoundly grateful. For the mail-order bride advertisement she had never meant to answer, for the mountain cabin she had never meant to find, for the man beside her whose grief had mirrored and ultimately helped heal her own. The path had been circuitous and painful, marked by loss and danger, but it had led them here, to this porch, this moment, this beginning. And for the first time in years, Clara looked toward the future not with fear, but with hope, not merely surviving, but truly living. Together, as if reading her thoughts, Ezra squeezed her hand gently. "Welcome home, Clara," he said softly. And in those three simple words, she found everything she and her sisters had been searching for: security, belonging, and the promise of love that could grow from shared brokenness into something whole and beautiful. "Home," she repeated, the word no longer a distant dream, but a present reality. "Yes, that's exactly what this is." Above them, stars emerged in full brilliance, ancient light mapping the vastness of possibility. And in the cabin behind them, two sleeping girls dreamed peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their long journey had finally reached its destination. Not an ending, Clara thought, as she and Ezra remained on the porch, hands joined in quiet companionship, but the most hopeful of beginnings. 3 years later, autumn had painted the hillside gold, brilliant streaks of color running across the Appalachian range like a gentle fire. The cabin was no longer as it had been 3 years ago. It had expanded, with 2 new rooms added to the eastern side and a broader porch wrapping around 3 sides. A true home now, not merely a refuge. Ezra stood beside the stable, watching Eleanor, now 13, expertly guide the young mare he had given her for her birthday the previous year. Her hands were steady on the reins, controlling the animal with a confidence that no one could have imagined 3 years before. "Higher!" Lily's voice called from the porch, where the 10-year-old was directing Mary, the 2-year-old toddler who was reaching for a red apple on the table. "If you really want it, you have to reach higher." Mary, with her blonde curls and her mother's blue eyes, stood on tiptoes, small hands stretching upward. When she finally touched the apple, joy illuminated her face. "Mama!" Mary called out, turning toward Clara, who was emerging from the cabin with an infant in her arms. "I did it!" Clara smiled, their youngest daughter, Elizabeth, named after Eliza, sleeping peacefully in her embrace. At 30, Clara no longer carried the tension of those first days at the cabin. Now she radiated the tranquility of someone who had found where she belonged. "Ezra," she called softly, "our guests have arrived." A wagon appeared on the trail, wheels rolling smoothly on the stone path that had been widened and reinforced over the seasons. Nathaniel Morgan, who had moved to the nearby town after the trial, guided the wagon with familiar confidence. Beside him sat a young woman, her belly swollen with their first child. Ezra moved forward to greet them, waving Eleanor back. "It's time," he called. "Today is special." Inside the cabin, no one would recognize it as the somber, cold place of 3 years past. Light poured through new windows, illuminating the polished wooden floor. The large table in the center, crafted by Ezra's own hands in his expanded workshop, had room enough for the entire family and guests. "Nathaniel," Ezra greeted him with a warm embrace. "Rebecca," he nodded to Nathaniel's young wife. "You made it." "I couldn't miss this day, even if we're a month late," Nathaniel smiled, handing Ezra a thick envelope. "Here, Uncle Ezra, all the paperwork is complete. The Kentucky property has been sold, and the money deposited in trust for the girls." He looked at Eleanor with pride. "One day, my niece will be the wealthiest woman in these parts." "But not today, Peteon," Clara said, transferring Elizabeth to Ezra's arms. "Today we have a different ceremony." They moved outside where Pastor Thornton waited beneath a large maple tree that grew near Eliza's symbolic grave. It had been Eleanor's idea that Mary should be baptized here, where the golden-haired lady could witness. "Lily says she's always here," Eleanor had explained, "and Mary is the first child born in this cabin. It would mean something." As the ceremony began, Ezra stood beside Clara, one arm holding their youngest daughter, the other hand clasping his wife's. 3 years ago, he couldn't have imagined this moment, standing among his family, no longer haunted by grief and vengeance. "It's perfect," Clara whispered, as if reading his thoughts. "Not perfect," Ezra replied softly, "but right." After the baptism, when everyone had gathered around the table for dinner, Lily suddenly stood with a solemnity rarely seen in a 10-year-old. "I want to tell a story," she announced, "about how our family was made." Clara and Ezra exchanged surprised glances, but neither stopped her. "Once upon a time," Lily began, her voice clear and carrying through the room, "there was a man who lived alone on a mountain. His heart was broken because he lost his beloved wife. And far away, there were 3 sisters who also lost their parents because of bad men." Eleanor watched her sister with pride and amazement. No one had taught Lily to tell stories this way. "The golden-haired lady couldn't stay in this world," Lily continued, "but she still wanted the man to be happy. So she found the 3 sisters and brought them to his mountain." Mary, sitting on Clara's lap, gaped in wonder. "Is that us, Mama?" she whispered. Clara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "At first, the man didn't want them to stay," Lily went on, glancing at Ezra with a mischievous smile. "He was too sad to see new love. But the golden-haired lady knew they belonged together. She helped them find each other, and together they defeated the bad men." Ezra felt a slight shiver run down his spine as he recalled the night Edward and Clay appeared at the cabin. The trial was long over, both men sentenced to hang for their crimes. That chapter was closed. And the man wasn't lonely anymore, Lily concluded. He had a new family, and the golden-haired lady still watches from heaven, smiling because he learned to love again. The room was silent when Lily finished her tale. Then Mary clapped her hands with delight, breaking the solemn atmosphere. "More, more!" "Another time, my love," Clara soothed, wiping away tears. "Now it's time for dinner." After the guests had departed and the girls were in bed, Ezra and Clara sat on the porch as was their evening custom. Elizabeth slept in Clara's arms, her tiny breath steady in the cool autumn night. "I had no idea Lily remembered so much," Clara said. "She was only 7 when we came here." Ezra sipped his coffee, contemplative. "Not memory, it's how she understands the world." He looked up at the star-filled sky. "Sometimes I wonder if Eliza truly, I believe she does," Clara said gently. "Some things can't be explained by reason, like how we found each other." Ezra smiled, placing his hand over his wife's. After 3 years, the gesture still brought the same warmth as the first time. "I know one thing Lily got right," he admitted. "I was too lost in grief to see a future. But you and the girls brought one to me." "We found each other," Clara replied. "That's what matters most." From the girls' room, Lily's voice drifted out. She was still awake, still talking to her invisible friend. "And then the family grew," they heard her say, "with new babies and new stories. And they'll tell our story, won't they?" No answer they could hear, but Lily giggled as if she'd received a satisfactory response. Ezra and Clara sat in comfortable silence, watching their sleeping child and listening to Lily's whispers. Above them, the stars twinkled as they had for countless generations before them and would continue to do for generations to come. just as their story, a story of loss, of seeking, and ultimately of finding each other, would be told through many generations. I love you, Ezra said simply, words he couldn't have imagined speaking 3 years before. And I love you, Clara replied, resting her head against his shoulder while Elizabeth breathed evenly in sleep. And in that perfect moment, perhaps they weren't the only ones watching the mountain night. Perhaps, as Lily still insisted, the golden-haired lady was looking down as well, smiling at the family built from the fragments of tragedy, mended with love and time, stronger at the healed breaks.